Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sami Paavola. I'm a researcher here in University of Helsinki, and I have been working in many projects on ICT and especially collaborative learning, and nowadays more also within workplaces. So the agenda, what I'm about to talk about maybe 40 minutes, is about I will present some background issues on what we have been calling knowledge creation metaphor of learning, and also about this I would say a bit ugly term trialogical approach, or a bit clumsy word as such, trialogical approach to learning, and how it differs from kind of individualistic approaches to learning, monological views, and also dialogical approaches. And then I will very shortly say something about design principles. We have defined so-called design principles for this trialogical learning, so I will shortly explain them. And then we have some time for discussion, but of course you can interrupt me if I notice that you raise your hand. So if you have some questions or clarification, you can interrupt me also. So this is basically the agenda. So I will start with very broad notion, or there has been discussions on how fundamental this change is now when we are using more and more digital technologies. So is it really a fundamental change on how people work and do things? And one term or notion related to schooling is digital natives. So the idea is that maybe you have heard on this notion that the younger generation or young people are born to a world where it's very natural to use digital technology, or they are all the time using it. And the discussion is it a totally different world for them compared to us, like me, who is kind of a digital immigrant. I have in my adulthood, I have started to learn how to use these technologies. And I think that nowadays this notion of digital natives is criticized also a lot, because the idea is that even when you have a lot of technology around, it does not mean that you can really use it in multiple ways. So it can be quite narrow use how digital technologies are used by younger people. But in any case, I think it's right to say that digital technologies are providing a kind of infrastructure for us all. We search information by using internet, and we communicate with others by social media or by emailing, and we buy things or search things by using internet. So in any case, it's kind of a basic infrastructure that influences our life a lot, of course. But then the question is that, especially in those projects that I have been involved, we have been always interested in how to really use technology and digital tools in a meaningful way, and what it means in pedagogical settings, that how we should use most fruitfully new digital technologies, and what it means in schools, for example, or in educational settings. Of course, that is kind of a basic question that we have been in our project, or what we have been thinking and trying to develop those kind of issues. One way of putting this, what we have been developing within our research groups, is if we think what information and communication technology means or how it is defined, so it's this basic definition emphasizes the idea that, of course, new technology gives a lot of new means for sharing information or searching information. It's a huge amount of information that is very easily available through internet nowadays. And the other part of this definition of information and communication technology is, of course, this communication side, that it gives new means of dialogues and negotiations and all kinds of social interaction. But what I'm trying to also kind of promote here is the idea that maybe it should be thought how this digital technology give new means of doing things more focusedly together and to collaborate around some specific issues and build on each other's work and so on. So this kind of co-development or co-construction or co-production, those kind of issues, and then think how to apply that kind of an idea also within educational settings. I think that is one way of putting this, what I'm trying to present here. And we have used or defined with Kai Hakkarainen and colleagues the idea of 3 basic metaphors of learning or basic metaphors of human cognition in a way. So the idea is that there are, this is of course very broad notion, because we try to say that this applies to hundreds of there are many theories about learning and human cognition. So of course there's a lot of variation, but the idea is that they are kind of basic ways of or one way of understanding main approaches to learning. And the background is in Anna Svart. Anna Svart is a famous educational research on mathematics learning, and she defined two basic metaphors of learning. And the first one can be called kind of acquisition idea about learning, and it's a kind of a traditional idea about school learning, or view about school learning, that learning is about acquiring knowledge, and it emphasizes facts and conceptual knowledge. And the idea is that individuals are, when they are learning, they are acquiring these kind of facts or conceptual issues, and also it might include that people are it's not necessarily easy, but it requires that people have a kind of a knowledge structure that they can really acquire or construct their own knowledge. And Svart's idea was that there were at the maybe 1990s, after 1990s, there were more and more theories about learning and approaches to learning, which emphasized that learning should be seen more like a social process of or getting involved in social processes. So it's more like an apprenticeship kind of learning, that it's not so much about acquiring conceptual or factual issues, it's more about being in contact and doing those kinds of things that that people who know the or can do the thing are doing. So Svart called that kind of, or those kind of learning theories or learning approaches participation approaches to learning. And we think that also this kind of idea that learning is about social interaction and dialogues fits quite well to this kind of idea. And it's very, we think that it's kind of a very good idea about learning, but what we claimed was that it kind of both of these metaphors are not very good at telling about those kind of or that kind of a learning where people are focusedly developing some things together. Because one thing is that that kind of a approach on two metaphors of learning was also quite a kind of a dichotomy, that either it is about facts or conceptual issues, or it's about practices and social interaction. And it seems that if we try to learn modern knowledge work, whatever that is, it includes both of these elements and maybe something more, because we try to develop things together, and it's about having some individualistic expertise on things, but also organizing things socially and collaboratively so that things are working. And that is why we started to call it a knowledge creation metaphor of learning, and this neologism, this trialogues or trialogical learning tries to catch that kind of an idea that there are kind of some shared things or objects that are developed together. So it's not just about social participation or dialogues, it's more like a focused, organized work around some issues or what we call objects. But maybe we can come back to this also, to this term trialogues, because there are some other bases also on that. Many of those theories that we were referring emphasize mediated nature of human activities, that we are not just interacting with other people, but we have all kinds of tools and artifacts that we are using also when we learn things and when we interact with the world. So basically this trialogical learning means that, or when it's put very shortly, it means that people organize their activities around some what we call objects. And these objects can be different kinds of things, like documents or models, or in simple cases also presentations, or but also ways of working, because one idea is that it's not necessarily quite easy for people to organize their work for developing things together. It takes quite a lot of planning and organizing to do that. So one idea has been that it's also on these processes how this kind of work is organized, that these people should be concentrate a lot. So it's not just these kind of end products or objects in that sense, but also these processes in themselves that should be reflected during this kind of a trialogues or trialogical processes. That was one basic idea. This monological view would mean very individualistic oriented approach to learning, that students try to alone or within solo performance learn things, and dialogues emphasize social interaction, especially dialogues and negotiations and those kinds of issues. This is why this trialogue, how it differs from dialogue. Dialogues can be a very important part of also this kind of trialogical learning, but it emphasizes more that we should have some kind of a focused and organized work around some shared objects, whatever they are in specific cases. And how we have defined this trialogical learning was that it's not so much a kind of a pedagogical model or traditional pedagogical model. There are in Finland, very influential pedagogical model has been, for example, progressive inquiry model, which specifies certain it specifies certain phases for learning and try to give kind of a at least relatively detailed guidelines how to proceed with if you try to apply progressive inquiry model. But this trialogical approach is a bit different because it's more about, it's such a broad approach, so it gives some kind of a guidelines for this kind of a focused work. With these guidelines, what we have been calling design principles, it tries to give a kind of ideas or inspiration how to change one's ideas about learning, having more these features of this trialogical approach. And I think this is when we had a kind of we had a big EU project on around this trialogical approach. We had many comments from our reviewers of that project that we should make a kind of a more detailed pedagogical model on it, and we were discussing a lot that and tried to make some kind of a more detailed instructions how to follow this kind of trialogical learning. But it seems that it was not, I think that it was not working very well, because the idea has been more that it's quite broad approach and also quite demanding approach if all these design principles are followed strictly. But it works better if the idea is that you don't need to follow all these design principles in similar, at least as strongly as others, and it might work better if you think your own ways of teaching or learning, and then try to change them a bit, having more this and try to think if there are some issues that can be applied in your own teaching or learning. And also this trialogical approach or trialogues can be seen as a kind of continuum of different kind of ways of thinking what it means, because, for example, a typical way of discussing on some issues is to have for example, a presentation on like this, and then start discussing on how it might be interpreted, or or developed, and that kind of a discussion is a kind of a often a kind of first step towards more in-depth versioning and working together and modifying things together. So it's kind of a we have called it kind of a object-oriented commenting, that it's more focused discussion and commenting on some specific issues, and that can be very useful. But of course, this the basic idea of trialogues try to build more in-depth work with these shared documents or presentations or whatever these focused objects are.